right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Career Pivot, Mastering Transferable Skills on Your Resume and Beyond. My name is Deana Andrews. I'm with the Career Management team here at Villanova University. If you've not yet interacted with Career Management, let me quickly introduce you. We're a team of professionals. We serve the College of Professional Studies, our graduate students, and our alumni. And our goal is to provide you with tools and resources that help guide your professional and your career development. Today, I am here as your facilitator for a topic that is very relevant for many of our students who are going through a career transition. Maybe you're contemplating a new job in a different industry. Maybe you took a pause from the workforce for a period of time and you're wondering, how do I translate all these skills on my resume, even if I haven't done like that thing? This session is going to help you with practical strategies to assess a job description, translate those skills, and make your resume stand out, even if you haven't done that thing. I am really excited to introduce you to our main presenters, Kareen Weeks and Dan Carr. Kareen is a Wildcat. We're proud to call her ours. In 2011, she received her master's from Villanova's Human Resource Development program. After starting her career in theater and entertainment, she found her true passion in helping organizations build amazing cultures while guiding individuals to ignite their inner spark. Kareen's a coach, an HR leader, a manager, and a business owner herself. So she's able to help businesses and humans achieve their goals simultaneously. With over 20 years of HR experience, Kareen is currently the Global Chief People Officer at Obviously, and she founded the coaching business Shine at Work. She also hosts a career development podcast, also called Shine at Work, and is the author of Setting the Stage, a guide to preparing for any feedback conversation. We are very fortunate to have her here today. And lucky for us, Kareen is joined by her colleague and her partner, Dan Carr, who, in addition to being a career coach at Shine at Work, is also a talent acquisition and recruiting expert. So for more than 15 years, Dan's worked with high growth startups and mid-sized companies as a recruiting leader, driving the strategic direction and execution of all areas of the talent lifecycle. In 2022, Dan broke from the traditional corporate structure and pivoted, sounds familiar, to launch a new venture with Kareen, his partner, focused on career coaching and career growth. So he now helps professionals navigate the next steps in their career, identifying where they can find fulfillment, creating a tailored guidance on job searches and personal branding, and navigating the complex recruiting landscape. We all know that hiring is a very volatile environment sometimes. Dan is passionate about empowering others to align their careers with their values and their goals. He's a lifetime New Yorker and a music enthusiast. And again, we are lucky to have him here today. So folks, you have two professional coaches with us on this webinar, and we hope that you learn from them and ask questions. As I mentioned earlier, we've got about 30 minutes of content with the rest for questions. So please don't be shy. You can enter your questions into the chat and we will cover them at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kareen and Dan.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having us. As Deana mentioned, being a former Wildcat myself, it's so excited to be here, although 2011 feels like forever ago. But so excited to be here with you and sort of talk through this. And Deana, do you want me to drive, or are you going to fast forward through the slides?
Yeah, I can fast forward.
Okay, perfect. So we already did the intros, so we don't need to go back through those again. One thing that we do want to share as a quick housekeeping note is, as Deana mentioned, this is a safe space to learn. That's why you signed up for this training and for this workshop, is to hear this advice, learn from it, and think about how it specifically applies to you. One thing that Dan and I really focus on in our coaching is, how do we help this be applicable to you? What action can you take from this? So think about this from your own perspective, and then we have tons of time for Q&A or even live coaching. Like, this is my situation. How do I think about it? So please bring that to the table. Alrighty, so the good news is you've thought about transitioning to a new role. You have invested in yourself. It's why you're doing all the things. So now let's actually figure out what that will look like now that you've done the first part of knowing I want to do something different. Now, how do I actually do it? And if you look at the next slide, this is my version of that. And the reason why I use this slide either as an intro slide, or I use it for a lot of different reasons. But in this situation, I wanted to still add it because it shows that I have lots of different places in my life where I use skills, whether that was in school, whether that was with different companies, on boards that I'm on, just with passions that I have when I have speaking engagements. And I'm using very similar skills in all those roles. So if I were to think about how I can translate my own skills, I can pull from all these different experiences, even if not on paper, it's clear that, I did one role and here's the next role. I can pull from all of these experiences to get there. And that's what we're really going to focus on today, is translating your skills. But first, let's kind of think about what that could actually look like, because in job descriptions, there are a lot of words, and a lot of them are probably very copy and pasted. Daniel and I have each written a lot of job descriptions, and we've definitely taken a little from here, taken a little bit from there. And so when you say things like leadership, fast pace, agile, think of some of those words that you've seen in every job description. What does that actually mean? And so, for example, we were working with one client who was coming from higher ed administration. So she actually worked for like the dean's office. And she loved the data side of things. She loved filling reports for the dean. So she was really considering a switch into a data analyst role outside of higher ed. And she would look at these job descriptions. She'd go, I don't even know what this means, or this could mean a million different things. How do I actually think about it? And so we were able to use our experience from being the ones who wrote those job descriptions to help her translate it. So one thing to think about is when these job descriptions are being written, technology might be used or is probably being used. So how can you use technology for your own advantage? So if we move to the next slide, we wanted to call out the fact that technology is a helpful tool. So if you're thinking about how your skills can be translated into something else, or if you're looking at a job description and saying, I don't know what the heck this means, or this could mean a million different things, or this is what it means to me, is this what it's going to mean in this new industry that I'm targeting? Think about a couple of different things. So first of all, AI. It's very possible recruiters are using AI to build the job descriptions. We also don't want to create everything from scratch. So thinking about it from that perspective is, what could this actually mean based on this industry? And then you can use AI in two different ways. One, you could ask it, I'm looking at a job description that says leadership in an e-commerce company overseeing this team. What might be some skills that they're looking for? And it could help you prepare that way. It could also help you start to write a resume or a cover letter that's using some of the words that are in the job description. And Dan's going to talk about this a lot more here in a minute, but you can start using that. So you're not just staring at that blank piece of paper or staring at that resume you've had for the last 10 years. And like, you can't get out of your own head of how to think about it. The trick is you then want to make sure you personalize it, because recruiters will know if it was just the one that came out of ChatGPT and you just put it out there in the world. So let technology help you. Ask it some questions about if you're not sure what you're seeing in a job description, and then use it to help revamp your own resume or cover letter. Just don't let it be the final answer. The other technology question we get a lot of questions about is ATS. So for those of you who don't recognize that term, it's applicant tracking system. And that is what often recruiters are using to collect applications and sort them and lead their recruiting process. So one thing we hear a lot from our clients about are, how do I use keywords so that the ATS finds me? And yes, that is absolutely a thing. If you're working at a larger company that's getting thousands of applications, you're probably using an ATS to say, mark the applications that have these 5 words or these experiences or something like that, because a recruiter just cannot go through all of those. So you do want your application and your resume to represent those words that they care about, and know that an actual human will eventually look at that resume. So even if an ATS kind of scours it to bring it to someone will then actually look at your resume for the phone screen, for the interviews. So again, you want to think about not just the technology side, but then personalizing it so that it tells your story, which Dan is also going to talk a lot about here in a second. So let's actually use one example before we start to bring this for life for you. So the example that we pulled out is leadership. That is a word that, no matter the job, shows up a lot in different job descriptions. And you might be thinking, well, I don't know if I have any leadership experience. So first, let's kind of define what leadership could be, because again, we want this to be really tangible for you. So it could mean that you're just getting people rallied behind an idea. It could mean that you need to drive results through getting other people involved and you need to influence other people in order to get there. You might have to make some decisions or have some tough conversations. But this doesn't necessarily mean you're managing people. This doesn't necessarily mean that you are leading a department. It could mean that you just have the experience doing these things in different ways. And so on the next slide, we called out some different ways you might have done this in another world that could define leadership for you. And we're going to give you a client example here in a second. So, for example, you are all enrolled in various classes. Did you lead a class project or organize the group and made sure the presentation was delivered on time? That checks a lot of leadership boxes. Did you lead a volunteer effort at a kid's school or something in your neighborhood that you are helping lead so that it is, not work, but it's definitely something that you did where you led or organized or influenced others? Maybe if you come from military service, maybe you organized a training mission or led something that was happening within the time that you were in your service. Or it could be that you took initiative in your community, like maybe you got some petitions signed, or if you live in an apartment building and you have like an HOA or something like that, and you sat on that board. Those are all ways to demonstrate leadership, even if your role has not been a quote unquote leader, or you haven't been in an organization where those words were used. These are things that you could pull out to say, I've done that, and this is how I know I'm going to talk about it. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. And Daniel's going to take over now to talk more about how you can then start to bring that to life with your applications.
Okay, so being that I have a lot of experience on the other end of the hiring process, I kind of want to give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of what you're up against and how you can use it to your advantage. So the number one thing you want to think about when you're applying to roles is, who is my audience? And generally the tip of the spear of any hiring process for any company, it's going to be the recruiter. And as Karen was kind of giving you a little bit of insight into, recruiters notoriously are dealing with very heavy workloads. At any given time, they can be working on 10 to 20 different positions. They're managing multiple different stakeholders with competing priorities across the business, and they're reviewing hundreds of resumes on a daily, weekly basis. So what does that mean? Essentially, every resume that they get in front of them, they look at for about 6 to 10 seconds, is the harsh truth of it. So how do you optimize and how do you maximize that 6 to 10 seconds for yourself? And the real key is with the job description. You want to think about the job description as being sort of the blueprint of the role. It's a reflection of the recruiter and the hiring manager sat down and had a conversation and thought about the number one priorities for the position, what they're valuing in this person, and they put it down all on paper. So what is the recruiter doing in that 6 to 10 seconds? They're generally going into the role or resume review with 2 to 3 non-negotiables for every position. And where you get those non-negotiables, it's usually the first things that they talk about in the job description. What are the first couple of bullets in the qualifications? What are the first couple of bullets in the responsibilities listed out? So for you, from a strategic standpoint, as you go through that job description, you want to reflect that back to them and make it highly visible as possible. So as Karen was talking about leadership, if that's a number one thing, that's the first bullet that they're talking about under responsibilities, you want to pull whatever leadership transferable skill that you have and bring it to the top. You also want to make sure that you're reflecting the language that they're using. So if they're looking for cross-functional collaboration and you've got a lot of teamwork on your resume, you want to reflect that language back to them. And sort of edit your resume so you're using terms like cross-functional collaboration and just replace some of those, the language that they're using. And all of this is the idea of the recruiter's got 6 to 10 seconds. They've sort of got their 2 to 3 non-negotiables that they're either going to move you into phone screen or they're going to push you to the side. And so you just want to bring that to the top, utilize the same language that they are using, and maximize that 6 to 10 seconds. So I'll give you a client example of, I was working with a client who had a pretty in-depth marketing background, about 10 to 15 years. And her background was kind of all over the place, but the common thread was marketing, but she wanted to move into something that was a little bit different. And when we first met up, she gave me a resume and it was extremely dense. It was like 2 to 3 pages long. She had just dumped everything she had ever done onto the resume and was sending it out, the same resume, to every position, hoping that the recruiter would sort of connect the dots for her and find maybe in paragraph 2 where she had done the thing that they're listing as 1. And we went through and we really pared that back. And then we started diagnosing on an application by application basis, really looking at the main things that they were talking about in the job description. And we started to move the pieces of her resume. So if they're looking for engagement and retention experience, and that was bullet 5 for her, we made it bullet 1. And the idea is, I just want you to take away that there's a very short amount of time that you have to make an impact on the recruiter. So as you're thinking and you go through and you figure out what your transferable skills are for that role that you want to pivot into, make sure that you're maximizing and bringing that to the top in your resume, and you're also reflecting language back. So like teamwork, if they're calling it cross-functional collaboration, make sure you use those same terms. And that client I was telling you about, we went through, we started doing that, and in a 2 weeks time, she was generating much more from an interview standpoint, and it really had an impact on her process. Okay, we can move to the next slide. Okay, so this is really important, especially anybody that's making a shift or a pivot in their career, is controlling the narrative where you can. So those same recruiters that we're talking about that have 6 to 10 seconds to look at your resume, if they get a resume and the last title and the first couple bullets do not connect, it's not apples to apples to the role that you're applying to, and there's nothing that gives them insight into the intention of why you're doing that, they'll just move on. So there's a few opportunities in the application process where you can really impact the narrative and raise your hand and give the recruiter what your intention is and why you're making the move and why you think you have some transferable skills that come to the table and would make the learning curve much shorter for you. So number 1 would be the summary on your resume, right? Like that is the perfect opportunity to tell a little bit about your story and make sure that the recruiter doesn't think, a lot of times they'll connect the dots on their own if you don't connect them for them. So they'll think you're just applying to a bunch of positions, you didn't understand what the role was. They want to move on as quickly as possible if they can. But that resume summary, the first thing that they see right out of the box, if you can tell them a little bit about your narrative of, I was in X career, I'm looking to make this shift, I bring X, Y, and Z transferable skills, and this is why this is really important to me. At least you're giving them a little bit of an inkling of what's going on and your intentions behind the application. So I'll give you an example. I had a client who had a deep background in teaching and really wanted to move into the corporate world, and training and development seemed to be a good area where she could bring a lot of her transferable skills from what she's been doing in teaching into the corporate world. So the first thing that we did was, at the top of her resume, we wrote experienced educator transitioning into learning and development, bringing 10 plus years of instructional design, facilitation, and student engagement to the corporate training environment. So right out of the box, we let the recruiter know what their intention was. We gave them some of the transferable skills that we think is going to shorten the learning curve, and we gave them the intention of what we're doing. So now as a recruiter, I'm intrigued. The second opportunity is the cover letter. Cover letter, a lot of people make the mistake of just rewriting the resume. right? But the reality of the situation, no one is looking at your cover letter until they've already gone through your resume and have a pretty good sense of your background. So the cover letter is a really great opportunity, again, to hone in on that sort of elevator pitch of, I was doing this, I'm looking to make this transition, and this is what I bring to the table and why I think this will be a pretty easy learning curve for me. The other opportunity is, I'm a pretty big stickler for reaching out to people after you've applied to position. Don't just like hit the send button and pray. Do a little bit of research, see if you can identify the recruiter. I really like trying to find the hiring manager, and that takes a little bit more legwork, but do a little detective work on, this position probably reports into one of two people at this company, and send them a note. And it's a good opportunity to, again, share your story, your narrative, and control the narrative. Because going back to the idea that recruiters got 6 to 10 seconds, and if you're not giving them any reason not to move on, they'll make the connections on their own, and they'll transition and move on from your resume. Okay, so what if I haven't done the thing? This is a reality, right? There's tons of, especially if you're transitioning, maybe there are certain responsibilities or certain tools or softwares that a job description is listing out that you simply just haven't had the opportunity to have exposure to. And I'll tell you, the most impactful thing that you can do there is demonstrate self-awareness, be honest, and have transparency, and call out. Don't hide from the things that you don't bring to the table. And there's the couple different ways that you can do that. So you can either tell them and look at things that are transferable from your background. So like we were talking about ATSs before, like, I haven't worked in this ATS, but I learned X, Y, and Z software in a very short turnaround time period. And I'm very confident that I can learn on the fly and shorten the learning curve for myself. Another thing that you can do, I'll give you a client example. I was working with an engineer who had been at the same company for 10 plus years, which was great. But at the same time, it only gave him exposure to the tools that company was utilizing. So as he was applying or looking at job descriptions, high up in the responsibilities were a lot of different technologies and languages that he hadn't touched on, and he was getting overlooked on when people are going through resumes. So if you start to identify those consistent things, it's always a great approach to go out there and look and see if there's some light lift online classes that you can take that start to at least give you an introductory knowledge of whatever it is. So in his case, there were a couple different languages that repeatedly were coming up that his company hadn't moved into. And we went out and started to find classes that he could take. And then you can list that on your resume as class in progress or completed X class, but it's on there. And then it's a great conversation piece as well when you're talking to an interviewer. And instead of saying, I don't have that experience, you can say, well, I actually identified that was coming up in a lot of positions that I'm interested in. And you can show that you took the initiative and the motivation to go out there and shorten the learning curve for yourself. And it's always going to be extremely valuable to demonstrate that to a recruiter versus I just don't have the thing. So there's a lot of ways that you can get around that, but the main point is don't shy away from it. Call it out, demonstrate self-awareness, and then take a little bit of initiative where you can to try and be able to crowbar that onto your resume and get some experience under your belt so you can start to share that on your resume.
Alrighty. So we are going to bring this to life now in a real life example. And we wanted to pick a role that was, pretty generic because everybody on this call might be in different fields looking for different kinds of jobs. So we wanted to pick a role that was, probably pretty familiar to folks, whether it's your field or not. So if you go to the next slide, this is an example of a customer service manager. So someone who's going to oversee a team of customer service representatives. You call 1-800-Verizon to have a question. It's the person that sort of manages that team. So they want to make sure there's timely and effective support while meeting certain service goals. You're going to be responsible for supervising and training the team, developing policies, and improving customer satisfaction. So again, whether you've ever done this role or not, probably a concept that sort of makes sense. So how would you think about the experiences you have that could apply to these kinds of key things that they're looking for? So if you move to the next slide, let's start breaking this down a little bit. And we actually had a client go through something very similar. So they were coming from supply chain management, so fulfillment, shipping, making sure the product actually got out the door. And he liked it, like it was fine, but he really felt disconnected from the customers that were getting the product. And so he wanted to move into customer service. He had done some management before. Obviously fulfillment kind of falls under customer service depending on the kind of role, kind of company you're in. So he thought it was something he'd be really interested in. And so we had to think about how to parse out the work that he had done in order to hit some of these things. So the first one is supervising and training. I recognize a lot of folks might not actually have managed people with a direct line. You had to hire them, you had to do performance reviews, all those kinds of things. It doesn't mean you haven't either supervised or trained or mentored folks. So whether that is outside of work through like a volunteer group or an event that you managed, or internally at other roles, is there a new hire you mentored and helped train? That you would definitely want to call that out. Did you have to do peer feedback or coaching? Especially when it comes to engineering groups, they do what's called code review. And so often you're giving feedback on that coding. That's very much the feedback you would have to do if you were a manager. Or maybe you managed a project. So maybe people didn't actually report into you, but you managed the work that people were doing because it all rolled up into this project that you were responsible for. So with the person that we are working with who is moving from supply chain management, he was responsible for making sure that the team that, though it didn't directly report to him, the requests were coming from customer service. He then had to make sure they actually had the inventory. So he was constantly working with the inventory team to then make sure the product was getting out in time and then reporting back if they needed new supplies and they need to get some more. So he was responsible in giving feedback and managing and influencing a lot of different people, even if they didn't directly report into him. The next piece of the job description mentioned developing policies. So how are we going to think about that? Well, developing policies, maybe you have made recommendations on processes in your last job. So how many of us have sat in a role and we had to do the thing and we said, this is not the best way to do this. There's got to be a better way, a more efficient way, something. Let me recommend something. And so whether that went into play or not, fine, although it's awesome if it did actually get implemented. But it wasn't your job to do that, but just as a good team member and a good employee, you took the initiative to make that recommendation. That's something that you can call out. Maybe you improved the way you worked within those processes. So maybe you weren't able to change the actual process, but you took a step back and said, okay, well, if these are the steps I have to follow, what things can I be doing differently to be more efficient in it? And so you've affected the policy for yourself, for lack of a better phrase. Or maybe there is a way that you would have made a recommendation in a previous situation. And again, maybe if you didn't even have the chance to do it, upon reflecting on it, you know what you would have recommended and the impact it could have had. So I think sometimes, and I get it, we all want to be honest, and I'm not saying lie, but sometimes I think we get too bogged down in the details of the situation. Well, technically it wasn't my job to make that recommendation, or I didn't actually end up doing it, but I came up with it, or I made the recommendation. Those all count as great stories. You took the initiative to see that. So you recommended, improved, developed, created, even if it wasn't your job or even if it wasn't actually implemented, you took the initiative to do so. So one thing that we did with this client who was in supply chain, he noticed that there was definitely a disconnect between inventory and then actually getting it out the door. And they weren't being proactive and making sure they had what they needed. It was all once the order came in, then they dealt with the situation. And so he made a recommendation on how to change the system to look for certain things and be able to predict what was going to be needed based what was in the pipeline and how many days based on close of the sale did they have to order things. And he was able to improve how fast they were able to get the supplies out the door. And that is a huge change to how they were doing things. And that's a great example, which we're going to talk about here in a second, of then having way more satisfied customers because they got their product much faster. So that was a great example for him to bring into that conversation. So let's go through the last couple of examples in the CS manager one. So as I mentioned, improving customer satisfaction. I always talk about this in my role when I think about different roles within an organization who have to demonstrate different competencies, different values, help support the different pillars of the business, however companies like to talk about it. Usually customer service, customer satisfaction, customer focus, something like that is part of the values. In an HR role, I have not talked to one single customer or any business I've ever worked for because that's just not my role. However, I absolutely have to make sure my internal customers are satisfied, supported, have the right things, I listen to them, etc. So if you have not worked in a customer-facing role before, that doesn't mean you didn't help customer satisfaction, either a couple of steps removed from customers. For example, I make sure I hire the right people who are customer-facing, and that is definitely going to impact customer satisfaction. Or I'm thinking about my internal customers and how I've helped with that satisfaction. So take customer as in like, well, did I actually talk to the external customer? Remove that definition and think about who your customers were in your previous roles. So if you are thinking about, I know paralegal is a huge certificate at Villanova. So if for some reason customer satisfaction was a part of that, who are your customers? Maybe they're the lawyers or the people that you're supporting internally to make sure the briefs are done right and all the things that paralegals have to do. I'll admit I don't know much more past that, but that's my example. So skills that you use are active listening to make sure you actually are hearing and understanding someone's concern, getting ahead of a problem. So don't just be reactive, be proactive, and then helping think through what the best answer could be. Because customer satisfaction is not about just saying yes, and the customer's always right is no longer the situation. So in the supply chain client that we were talking about, yes, he did end up having ways to impact customer satisfaction. We also pulled out a couple of things that he did for internal customer satisfaction, including ways he had helped his own CS team and what he was able to do to support them so that they then had more customer satisfaction, because through his role, obviously there was some direct impact. And then finally, system requirements. So Daniel mentioned this earlier about the what if I don't know the thing. So being in supply chain, this client had some very specific systems that he was working with, and they didn't always tie into Salesforce, for example, or whatever the CRM was that CS people usually use. But he did have tons of systems experience. And so for him, we were able to talk about how he learned those systems because he actually didn't come from a supply chain background. So he had to learn those for the first time. The example we have here is, if you're the treasurer of your HOA, you have to know QuickBooks. How did you learn that? And so being ready to talk about, okay, maybe I was able to figure out how to check those other boxes. But as Daniel said, if you need to have the answer of, I actually don't know that particular thing, but this is how I've learned other things. And we were able to help that client be ready for that. It ended up landed a great CS manager role, actually at a jewelry store or jewelry company where they really appreciated his supply chain background because that was part of their business, even though that he would not be a part of that particular department. So that's how we kind of have brought it to life for different folks. As we mentioned, we have tons of other stories that we're happy to share, but we also wanted to make sure we have plenty of time to open up the group. And I've already seen a couple of questions come in that we can definitely address. But as you've been hearing some of these stories, or as you're thinking about your own situation, please feel free to throw in questions in the chat so that we can take time to help you specifically answer your specific questions.
All right, so we'll give everyone oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to call out one thing. You were mentioning AI earlier, and how you can utilize that in your search. And if you're finding yourself getting stuck in sort of finding the bridge between what you've done and a role, you can throw those into ChatGPT and say, hey, this is my background and this is a role I'm interested in. Can you help me sort of figure out or start thinking of ideas of what value I bring to the table or how my skills translate to this? And again, it's not the answer to the test, but it will get the wheels in motion and it will give you a bit of a framework just to like launch from and start thinking about your role in a different way. So AI can be super helpful from that perspective.
Yeah, and even just one more additional thing to add on to that, when we work with clients, I am not a supply chain management expert. Daniel has never worked in higher ed specifically, but so it also actually helps us learn as well. And so we often work with clients and we just say, like, tell me about the jobs that you've had and tell me about those experiences. And let's talk about how you did that instead of just like literally what you did. Talk to me, let's go a little bit deeper. And so we can also, help you unearth that as well. And AI is a great way to do that as well, because it helps us kind of connect the dots too. Because we're learning about this as we work with clients too.
All right, so if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We do have one. I think it goes back to an earlier slide. I think Daniel was one of your slides. When you say bring it to the top, would you put those keywords in a professional summary, a list of skills, the top of the description for each role? I'd love to see what that looks like in print.
Yeah. So primarily what I was referring to was if you have the actual responsibility under a particular position, I would bring that and make it bullet 1 or bullet 2 and just move around your pieces as it coincides with the job description. If you find that some of the roles that you're looking for, some of your transferable skills may be a position back, then that's a good opportunity to, yes, throw it in the summary at the top of your resume, or skills that you have at the top. You can play around with the pieces, but whatever it is, whether it's a bullet or it's just a hard skill, get creative with how you bring it to the top. The idea is just make sure it's one of the things that the recruiter is seeing within the first 3 seconds that they're looking at the resume.
Yeah, and the person said, like, I'd love to see that, what that could look like in print. And Dan will tell you that while there are definitely best practices when it comes to resumes, one thing that we really try to look at is what is the right resume for this person. So, I mean, like Google Docs even has like a resume template. Canva has like a resume template. Those are obviously great places to start. But when you think about what is the story I need to tell, does a skills thing up top make sense? Does a summary make sense? Do I just jump in? Am I going to do it timeline versus related experiences? Like those are all things that we think about, and there's no right answer because it's so dependent on your specific situation.
Yeah, it really is. Everybody's a little bit different. And I'll give you another example of something that can be helpful is you had a client making a bit of a pivot in their career, and they had done some passion projects on the side from volunteering and sort of starting their own projects, but it was nothing connected to their actual roles that they had. So what we did was we made a 2-column resume just to elevate that volunteer experience, where you've got your regular job experience to the left, and then to the right, it was passion projects. And right out of the box, you're hitting them with some of those key things that they might be looking for in a resume. So it's really playing around with what you got from your experience, and then just positioning and getting creative with the resume and how you position those things.
Awesome. All right, next question. I have a pretty wide range of engineering related skills from military service on a nuclear submarine. I often struggle keeping my resume brief due to the things I want to include. What advice do you have for triaging experience to keep my resume short?
I think the first thing I would say is the compromise between what you want to include versus what the jobs that you're applying to are asking for. Sometimes you get a little precious about like, I do all these things and like, you really need to see my full picture, but the resume is just, you're just getting your foot in the door. You want a recruiter to say, hey, this person is worth a conversation. So what I would say is really try and pare it down based on job descriptions you're seeing and those top things that they're looking for. The rest can come through in the actual conversation and the resume and the interviews that you have, but try and first lean into what they're looking for before you're trying to get your entire career on a piece of paper.
Good. Questions are coming in. Thanks, everyone. All right, next one. Would you recommend limiting the resume size to 2 pages?
So it depends. I mean, it's a little bit different now that we're the old school vision of like your resume needs to be 1 page goes back to a world where resumes were actually physical, right? And now you're just scrolling on a page, so it's not the same thing. Nobody has to flip a page. But I would say rule of thumb is 1 page for about every 10 years of experience that you've got. And going further beyond that, nobody's really looking. So this is a great example. I was just working with a client who's got 20 years of experience, and we got it down to about 1.5 pages where it was about 2.5 pages. Recruiters are mostly focused on what you've done in the last 10 years. And then what we didn't want to take away from their career or the fact that they were able to grow in different positions. So we had their last 10 years of experience on the first page. And then the next, we had additional experience and then just listed out the roles and the years. So it's a conversation starter if somebody wants to talk and get into that experience, but it's not making the resume too content heavy and redundant for a recruiter. So I would just say go with the 10-year rule, and you can really shrink down anything beyond that and stick with that.
All right, another related resume question. Do you recommend customizing your resume for every job we apply for? Yes.
Yes, but I say that knowing that sounds like an extremely daunting task. So, and it depends. Like working with clients, we generally really try to hone in on 1, 2, 3 different types of positions that you're applying for. And then you can come up with like a really solid resume for each one of those types of positions. And then you're really just tweaking from there. It's reflecting back the language they use, you're moving around your bullets. But I would never tell you spend 3 hours rewriting each resume. Here's another area where AI comes in handy. LinkedIn actually has a function where you can put your resume in and it will tell you how viable of a candidate you are and what you might want to change. You can also use Perplexity or a ChatGPT and toss your resume in there and see if it has any immediate suggestions for you based on scanning your resume and the job description. So yes, customize for each, but don't slow down your job process to the point where you're spending another day writing a new resume. Just tweak, use the language that they have, and move your bullets to connect with the job description and sort of the high level stuff that they're looking for.
And that can actually speak to the person that asked the question about, I used to work on a nuclear submarine and I have all this experience. That might help sort of focus that. So my cousin actually used to work on a nuclear submarine when he was in the Navy, and he now works for a robotics company. And I don't know literally like how he put his resume together to get that job, but I would imagine he took the skills that he had from that experience in the Navy and then parse that out to focus on how that made him viable for this robotics company. And so that's probably one version of his resume, while he then might have had another version if he was looking to go work for like a nuclear plant or something like that. So that's kind of an example of, with that particular person, how that might play out.
And I think one important thing to call out, especially in this, when you're sort of standing at this crossroads and there's so many different options out there, what we do a lot of with clients is front end work of really figuring out and coming up with those couple of options that really make sense, really resonate with you, and could be potential career paths for you. So it's the work up front, and just make sure, because you'll drive yourself crazy if you just have one resume and then you just start firing resumes out to, oh, this position looks interesting, put some strategy behind it, do some of that front end work to really hone in on a couple of different career paths or types of roles, and that'll set you up for success a lot better than just like shooting and praying the same resume to a million different types of positions.
Yeah, no, I'm going to jump in really quickly. What you mentioned, the LinkedIn tool, we also have, Villanova also has a tool called Big Interview. And because all of you are students at Villanova, you can use Big Interview's AI tool. You can actually use it to compare a job description to your current resume, and it will spit out recommendations for formatting, content, right? How does it compare to the job description? So Big Interview is a tool that is available to all of our students. So I just wanted to throw that in there as well.
Yep, sounds very similar. There's a
Yep.
lot of
Yep.
tools out there, and like leverage them. To Karen's point earlier, you know, everybody's using AI. They're probably using AI to write the job description. So just be careful with it. And I think the key thing is put your spin on it. Make sure that it's customized and that you're putting your own voice to it. But yeah, those can be super helpful in this process.
Well, and it's
all right. We still got questions coming in. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
No, I was just gonna say it actually ties to the question that David just submitted, because I was going to give another plug for Villanova because he was asking about how to network within a company, whether they have a job opening or not. And I know Nova Network, right? Did I say that right? Did I get the platform name right? That is a great, there we go. That is a great way to take a step back. Yes, you absolutely want to reach out to people who are in companies, whether they're hiring or not. I literally just did a job search for one of my fractional clients where I hadn't posted the job yet. A, we're small, that we don't have an ATS, so I literally can't post it. And B, we literally weren't even to that point yet. I just wanted to kind of generate some pipeline to kind of see what the market was showing right now. And I went back to people who had connected with me on LinkedIn, had applied for jobs before, I knew through my network, and who had proactively reached out to our like careers at obviously.com to say like, I'm interested whenever there's roles available, please consider me. And I have a folder in my email for that. So those were 3 places I went to, which are 3 versions of people networking with me before I ever posted the role. And Nova Network is another great example of that. Is if you really legitimately are interested in a company, follow them, find people, because they will think of you first before they post the role or when they post the role. Or then when you apply, you can say, hey, do you have a referral fee? Like, I really am interested in this role. Can you refer me for it? And all of that is the front work you can do before you ever have to even get to the application part.
Yeah. And Daniel mentioned this too earlier. Daniel, you mentioned detective work, right? When you submit the application, the Nova Network is also really helpful in doing that detective work. If you're looking for a specific company, if you were trying to find a recruiter, there's over 26,000 people, Villanovans, right, on that network right now. So it will definitely help you with that detective work.
Yeah, and one thing, when you don't have any connection to the company, there's not even like a 3rd-degree connection. Sort of the final step in when I'm working with a client is look for alumni, because alumni are more than happy. If you reach out and say, hey, I really love what the company does, would love to hear a little bit about your journey there and your take on sort of the culture and how it's growing. I can't tell you how many times as a recruiter, I've gotten somebody in my company like, oh, this alumni reached out. I had a quick 15-minute call. They look pretty good. Would you mind doing a follow-up phone screen with them? It really works. And the other side of that coin is a lot of companies will have referral policies. So there's a little incentive for them to pass that on to the recruiter, and they might get an extra vacation day. They might get $1,500. You never know what it is, but really leverage alumni networks. They're usually more than happy to tell you a little bit about their experience working at a company. And the other thing I would say, going back to this question of like, company doesn't necessarily have an open position, the best time to network is before you have an ask. So if you can reach out and generate some sort of relationship under the same sort of idea of like, hey, I just really love what the company does, would love to connect and like learn about your experience. I know there's nothing open right now, but would love to keep my finger on the pulse and like learn a little bit more. That's a much better situation than like in the back of your mind is like, okay, when do I ask them if they can refer me for this position? That works too, but it's always a little bit easier when you don't necessarily have an ask.
That's great advice. All right, we have 2 more questions. Curious to know from you both how the recruitment industry is responding to the shift to a skills-based workforce, non-linear career paths. I work in TA ops in pharma, and it's been a hurdle to shift the mindset of recruiters and hiring managers to take a second look at those candidates who are considered non-linear or transitioning careers. Yeah, that's a great question.
It's interesting. We did a post, I don't know, maybe 3-4 months ago about hiring managers stop being so obsessed about jumpiness and like exact backgrounds or whatever, because frankly, especially after the last 5 years, who knows how people have had to navigate their careers or their life, because everything has been so upside down several times over. And so really helping people take a step outside of like, I need to find the purple squirrel who checks every single box and has been at one company for 5 years, or like whatever ridiculous things they're thinking of, and really start to think a lot differently. So it's clearly a sentiment that's out there, because like I said, we wrote this post and it was one of the most like responded to and active posts we've done in a while. So I just wanted to call that out, that I think there is a movement to get there for sure. And then it's about influencing the recruiters, the hiring managers. And I think whenever you can use actual examples. So maybe because I've just been doing this long enough, I can think of so many people just right off the top of my head who someone took a risk on, even on my own team. One of my best HR hires actually was a former teacher. She was actually friends that someone that Dan knew, and he knew I was hiring. And so she connected me with her former roommate who was looking for a job and was like a nanny at the time. Literally the best hire. She's still been at that company 7 years later. She's grown into a director role. So I think just being able to share those stories of like, if you're going to take a risk on someone, these are the things that you're still looking for to know the risk will be worth it. But let's remember that those great people are out there. So I think those real examples are helpful. I don't know if Dan has other thoughts, but that were two things I wanted to share.
That's great. You took what I would have said.
All right, I think this might be our last one. I worked 30 plus years as an occupational therapist, but had to leave that field because of physical limitations. I'm wondering how much information to share as to my limitations, or should I include it as an explanation as to why I'm changing careers?
You want to take the HR perspective on this one?
Well,
there's a lot of angles.
Yeah.
No, it's so funny because one of my very first clients when we started Shine at Work was actually an eyebrow artist who had to stop doing it because it really threw out her back. And she literally like couldn't lean over to do the eyebrows anymore. And she was like, I literally don't know what to do. And she ended up moving into like hospitality within property management because she was so good with people and understanding their needs, and like her EQ is really high. And so she was able to transition it into this like concierge role within this property management building. But I think, I guess first I'll say, I don't know what your limitations are and how much they would limit you from like a desk job or other roles, right? Like being an OT, that's very physical. Me sitting at my computer all day, less physical, so my limitations might be different. So I would probably talk more about lifestyle change or wanting to make a transition, that as much as you loved that work, that you're ready to do something different, and it just creates a whole different sort of lifestyle for you. And not literally go into whatever the physical limitations are, unless it is something that you are going to have to ask for an accommodation for. If you have to travel into an office and you have to sit at a desk for 8 hours and you can't do that, that's where you're going to want to bring it into conversation. But otherwise, I would probably talk more about, lifestyle change, want to try something new, and then immediately go into, and I'm really excited about this new thing that I'm targeting. Versus like I'm running away from something. It's I wanted to change, and this is why I've chosen this new career. And let me tell you all about why I'm going to be great at it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I like, to your point, I would touch on it, but you can just say, do a change in my personal life set me on a new path to explore new opportunities, and I've really identified X, Y, and Z as being something that really resonates with me, and why. So give a nod to it, but you can sort of keep it to personal change or whatever, like a very small term. And then look, that's all an opportunity when when you're talking to a recruiter, like maybe you go a little bit more based on like how much it might impact you in the role. But as far as like applying or like cover letters, I would keep it very short. And to Karen's point, really reflect on like why you're so excited about the new path.
Yeah, and interview prep is one of the other things that we do with clients for those exact reasons.
Yeah.
It's easy to say, okay, this is what to write in the resume, here's what to write in the cover letter. When you then start getting those live questions, knowing how you want to answer that ahead of time and how much do you need to, or how much you want to go into some of those details. That's another thing that we sort of help clients with along the way, is because, getting the interview is only step one. Then you have to handle all those conversations throughout the whole process.
And I will say on that note, when we work with clients, the interview practice starts at the beginning. So you don't wait until you get the conversation and like, okay, great, I have an interview in 2 days. Crap, I haven't prepared for this at all. So we start looking at the industry, and you can really come up with general questions that you will get for each and every role. And there's a lot of the structure that people use is behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when you did X, Y, and Z. So there's a lot of that you can start preparing for now. So you're comfortable with it. You're not sitting in an interview searching around for an answer of like, what did I do 5 years ago? So my advice would be start thinking about it now. And it's really a focal point of, as soon as we start an engagement with somebody, it's like, okay, let's get that muscle and start to build it a little bit, because it's going to pay off tenfold down the road when you're actually in front of somebody.
All right, those were our questions. We've got about 3 minutes left, so speak now or type now if you've got one last question to get in. Otherwise, we've got Daniel and Karen's information here on the screen. Please listen to their podcast. We are always looking for good podcasts to listen to in our industry, and this is a good one. And then I will also give a quick plug. For those of you who have not worked with us in the Career Center, you can scan the QR code here and schedule appointments with anyone on our team, depending upon which college you are in. And then also take a look at Career Connections, where we have a number of resources available to you. I don't have to do the Nova Network plug. Dan did that already for us. But again, please, if you're on the Nova Network, make sure you have your email updated and your profile updated. And if you are not, please consider joining and take a look at the groups that we have. Lots of good networking. We also post positions in each of the groups. So lots of good information there. So if there are no other questions, I'm going to thank Dan and Karen for spending an hour with us today. Really appreciate everyone's time, and to the folks who joined, thank you. And we hope to work with you guys soon.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Great questions.
Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Steve.